Everything you've been taught about economics is missing the most important option. You were presented with two choices: capitalism or socialism, free markets or government control, private corporations or state ownership. You've watched these systems battle for a century. You probably picked a side, or maybe you feel trapped between two bad options. Neither one seems to work for actual families, actual communities, actual human beings trying to build actual lives. But here's what nobody told you in school, in the media, in any political debate you've ever watched. There's a third way. And 100 years ago, G.K. Chesterton saw it so clearly that he wrote entire books explaining exactly why both capitalism and socialism would fail you, and what you should do instead. Think about your economic reality right now. Can you afford to buy a house? Do you own productive property, or do you rent everything? Your home, maybe your car, even your software? Do you work for a massive corporation where you're interchangeable, or for yourself where you control nothing? Does your neighborhood have actual local businesses owned by people who live there, or just chain stores owned by distant shareholders? Chesterton predicted every bit of this in 1910. He saw industrial capitalism destroying family ownership. He saw socialism centralizing power even more. And he said, there's another way. It's called distributism. You never heard that word in a presidential debate. It's not on the left-right political spectrum you've been handed. Your economic professor never mentioned it, but it explains your frustration better than anything else you've encountered. Here's the shocking part. Distributism isn't some impossible utopian dream. It's actually the system human beings lived under for most of history, and it's the system that massive economic forces have spent a century destroying. Because when families own property, they're harder to control. What if the reason you feel economically trapped isn't because you're failing, but because the game was rigged before you were born? What if both capitalism and socialism are two sides of the same centralizing coin? What if Chesterton saw what they didn't want you to see? I know that might sound radical. You're probably thinking, if this is real, why haven't I heard of it? That's exactly the right question, and the answer tells you everything about who controls economic narratives. Here's what I promise you in this video. You're going to understand distributism clearly enough to explain it to someone else. You're going to see why Chesterton developed it, what it actually means in practice, and how it applies to your life right now in 2024. You will discover why both major political parties ignore it, and what you can start doing immediately to move your life in a distributist direction. Chesterton was an economist. He was a journalist, a novelist, a Christian apologist, but he understood something professional economists missed. Economics isn't about graphs and GDP. It's about whether a father can own his tools and feed his family. Let me take you back to England in 1910. Chesterton is walking through London, and he's watching something die. For centuries, literally 1,000 years, ordinary English families owned things. Not vast estates, not factories, but productive property. A small farm, a workshop, tools of a trade. A blacksmith owned his anvil and forge. A cobbler owned his shop and leather. A farmer owned enough land to feed his family and sell surplus. These weren't rich people. They were what we call working class, but they owned the means of their own production. Now imagine what this meant practically. If you're a baker who owns your oven and your shop, you're not rich, but you're also not desperate. You can't be fired. You can't be replaced by someone cheaper. Your labor directly benefits your family. Your children inherit something real. You have what Chesterton called economic freedom. Not the freedom to buy whatever you want, but the freedom to not be completely dependent on someone else for survival. Chesterton watched industrial capitalism destroy this world with shocking speed. Factories required massive capital investment. Small workshops couldn't compete with mass production. Ownership concentrated upward into fewer and fewer hands. By 1910, most English workers didn't own anything productive. They sold their labor to factory owners, lived in rented housing, owned no tools, controlled no land. You know what fascinates me most about this? Chesterton noticed that both the capitalists and the socialists claimed this was good, just for different reasons. The capitalists said, this is progress, efficiency. These workers are better off with wages than with their little farms and shops. Specialization creates wealth. The socialists said, yes, it's progress. Now workers understand they're a class. Soon the state will own the factories instead of the capitalists, and everything will be fair. Both sides agreed on the fundamental move. Concentrate ownership, destroy small property, make everyone economically dependent on either corporations or government. And Chesterton said, you're both insane. You're both destroying the only thing that actually gives families stability and freedom, their own property. Notice how this works in reality. Imagine you're a farmer in 1850 who owns 10 acres. You're not wealthy, but you're not desperate either. You grow food, you sell some, you feed your family. Bad harvest? Tough year, but you survive. Good harvest? You get ahead a little. Now it's 1910. You lost your farm. Couldn't compete with industrial agriculture. Now you work in a factory. You rent a tiny apartment. You own nothing. Every single necessity of life depends on your wage. Get fired? Your family starves. Rent goes up? You have no leverage. Want to do things differently. Raise your kids with different values. Live counterculturally? Impossible. You're completely dependent on the industrial system. Here comes a really interesting part. Chesterton realized this isn't just economic. It's spiritual and political destruction. When families don't own property, they can't be independent. When they can't be independent, they can't resist. Whoever controls the economy controls everything. He saw factory workers and office clerks, even relatively well-paid ones, living in a new kind of slavery. Not chattel slavery, but wage slavery. Not because wages are inherently bad, but because complete dependence on wages, owning nothing yourself, makes you a subject, not a citizen. The Christian in Chesterton rebelled against this. God created humans for freedom, for creative work, for a family life that has some autonomy and dignity. Both capitalism and socialism were crushing this, just in different ways, toward the same centralized end. So he started asking, what would an economy look like that actually served family flourishing? What if instead of accepting that ownership must concentrate, we fought to distribute it as widely as possible? What the goal wasn't maximum efficiency or perfect equality, but maximum number of families owning enough to be free. That question became distributism. All right, let's get specific. What is distributism? Here's the core principle in one sentence. Productive property should be distributed as widely as possible among families and communities, not concentrated in either private corporations or state control. Notice the word distributed. Spread out, decentralized, owned by many rather than few. And notice productive property. Not just any possessions, but the things that produce wealth. Land, tools, workshops, businesses, skills. Chesterton wasn't imagining some fantasy where everyone's exactly equal. He was imagining, actually remembering, a society where most families own something productive. You might own a farm. I might own a carpentry shop. She might own a bakery. Different properties, different scales, but widely distributed ownership instead of concentrated. Let me show you something amazing about how he explained this. He used a brilliantly simple analogy. Too much capitalism does not mean too many capitalists, but too few capitalists. Think about that. What's wrong with modern capitalism isn't that people own things, it's that too few people own things. If everyone owned productive property, that's not a failure of capitalism. That's what capitalism was supposed to be. But when ownership concentrates into massive corporations, and most people own nothing productive, that's a perversion of the whole idea. Similarly with socialism, Chesterton said socialists correctly diagnosed that workers were being exploited, but their solution, let the state own everything. Just replace private monopolies with government monopoly. You're still propertyless. You're still dependent. You just have a different master. Distributism says, neither. Families should own. Now, you're probably thinking, Okay, but what does this look like practically? Fair question. Let me give you some concrete examples that Chesterton advocated. Small farms instead of agricultural monopolies, not massive industrial farms owned by corporations or collectives, but family farms of manageable size. You grow food, you own your land, you're not dependent on Walmart or the state for survival. Family businesses instead of corporate chains. The town bakery owned by the baker who lives upstairs. The hardware store owned by a family in the community. Businesses at human scale where owner and worker often overlap, where profit stays local. Guilds and cooperatives instead of corporations or unions battling corporations. Workers who actually own shares of the business they work for, organized by craft and locality. Not government-run, not shareholder-run, but worker-owner-run. Apprenticeship in craft instead of specialized wage labor. Learning a complete trade that you can practice independently, not just one small task in a massive system. Becoming a master craftsman, not an interchangeable cog. Here's what this meant philosophically. Chesterton believed humans are meant to be co-creators with God, doing meaningful work they control. When you're a craftsman who owns your tools and workshop, you exercise creativity. You see the fruit of your labor, you have dignity. When you're employee number 47,832, doing one repetitive task you don't control, your humanity is diminished. And here's what he discovered next. This isn't just about economics. It's about political freedom. When most families own productive property, government can't easily tyrannize them. You can resist. You can survive without their permission. But when everyone depends on either corporations or state for survival, power centralizes dangerously. Distributism includes a principle called subsidiarity. Decisions should be made at the most local, smallest level possible. Your family decides how to run your farm. Your town decides local matters. Only genuinely national issues go to national government. This isn't just efficiency. It's about preserving human agency and preventing tyranny. Imagine this scene for a moment. A town where most families own their homes. Many own small businesses. Decisions about schools and roads and community life are made locally by people with actual skin in the game. Nobody's fabulously wealthy, but nobody's desperate either. Economic crises don't destroy everyone because people have property, skills, local relationships, resilience. That's not fantasy nostalgia. That's how human beings live for most of Western history. Chesterton watched it die and he said, "We can rebuild this. We should rebuild this. Human flourishing depends on it. The question is, how? And can it actually work in the modern world?" Here comes the part that's going to make you question a lot of what you thought you knew. Distributism doesn't fit on the political spectrum you've been handed. Think about how you've been trained to think about economics. There's a line, right? On the far left, total government control, communism, everything state-owned. On the far right, total free market, laissez-faire capitalism, minimal government. And you're supposed to pick somewhere on that line. Every political debate you've ever watched operates on the spectrum. Democrats want more government involvement in healthcare. Republicans want less. Democrats want higher minimum wage enforced by state. Republicans want market to set wages. It's always the same binary, government control versus market freedom. Chesterton walks into the room and says, "Your spectrum is fake. Both ends lead to the same place, ordinary families owning nothing." Notice how this works. Follow capitalism far enough, and you get what we have now. Mega corporations that are the market, Amazon, Walmart, BlackRock, Google, these aren't participants in a free market. They are the market. Small businesses can't compete. Families can't own productive property because capital requirements are massive, and these corporations crush competition. You get oligarchy. Follow socialism far enough, and you get the state owning and controlling all productive property. Soviet Union, Maoist China, Venezuela. The state becomes a single employer, the single landlord, the single source of everything. Families own nothing. You get totalitarianism. Different paths, same destination. Concentrated ownership, powerless families. But distributism isn't centrist compromise, splitting the difference. That completely misses what Chesterton's doing. He's not on their spectrum at all. He's asking a fundamentally different question. Capitalism and socialism both ask, who should own the means of production? Private interests or the state? Distributism asks, how do we arrange society so that families own the means of production? See the difference? It's not about where on the line between two bad options. It's about rejecting the premise that those are the only options. Here's the question Chesterton asked that nobody wants to answer. Why do we accept that ownership must concentrate? Think about it. For most of human history, before the Industrial Revolution, ownership was relatively distributed. Millions of families owned farms, shops, workshops. Was it perfect? No. Was everyone equal? No. But was productive property widely distributed? Yes. Then over about 150 years, that world was systematically destroyed. And both capitalists and socialists told us this was inevitable, necessary, progressive. But was it? Chesterton said, no, it was a choice. More specifically, it was a crime. Powerful interests, industrial capitalists in England, for example, used government power to enclose common lands, force small farmers off their property, create a populous working class that had to accept factory wages. This wasn't natural evolution. It was policy, backed by force. And once that theft was accomplished, both capitalism and socialism built their systems on top of it, accepting mass propertylessness as a starting condition. Distributism says, we should never have accepted that starting condition. We should restore distributed ownership. Now here's what's uncomfortable. This means Chesterton is more radical than socialists. Socialists accept that workers won't own property. They just want a state to manage it for the people. Chesterton says workers should actually own it, for real, in their own names, as families. But immediately you're thinking, okay, this sounds great in theory, but it's impossible now. We can't turn back the clock. Globalization, technology, specialization, the world's changed. And Chesterton would say, you're right that you can't go back, but you can go forward differently. The principles don't change. Human nature doesn't change. Family flourishing doesn't change. The question is whether you have the courage to rebuild, even when it's hard. The honest truth? He knew distributism would be hard. He knew powerful interests would oppose it. He knew it couldn't happen overnight, but he believed the alternative, accepting permanent family powerlessness, was worse. Let me connect this directly to your life right now in 2024. You can't afford to buy a house. Your parents bought one at your age. You can't. Why? Chesterton would say, because housing became an investment commodity for corporations and foreign capital instead of productive property for families. When BlackRock owns 80,000 single-family homes to rent out, when Chinese investors buy real estate they never occupy, housing prices are driven beyond the reach of families who actually want to live there. Distributist principle. Homes should be owned by families who live in them, not treated as speculative assets. Policy would reflect this. Strong incentives for family ownership, strong disincentives for corporate ownership of housing. Your wages are stagnant while costs rise. You work hard, but you're not getting ahead. Why? Because you don't own productive property. You only sell your labor. When labor is your only economic input, you have limited leverage. Corporation can replace you, automate you, offshore you. Chesterton saw this coming. Wage labor alone, without property ownership, keeps you economically vulnerable forever. A distributist economy would aim to ensure that over time, workers gain ownership stakes in businesses, becoming worker owners, not just wage earners. Your town's downtown. And here's what almost nobody talks about. Family formation is economically impossible for many people your age. You like to marry, have kids, but you can't afford it. Why? Because the entire economic system is now optimized for two-income households or investor households to bid up the price of everything. Housing prices assume Both spouses work full-time. Childcare costs more than rent. Having one parent home with kids is financially unthinkable for most families. Chesterton would say this is barbaric. The most important work in civilization, raising children, has been economically destroyed. Distributism would aim at family economics. Can a family survive and thrive with one income if necessary? Can families own enough productive property, home, tools, side business, that they have resilience and options? Imagine your life 6 months after moving toward distributist principles, not perfectly, but directionally. Maybe you can't buy a farm, but you buy a house instead of renting, even if it's small. Maybe you can't quit your job, but you learn a craft or skill on the side that you could monetize independently if needed. You're building a second income stream you own. Maybe you can't change the whole economy, but you deliberately choose to buy from local businesses when possible, even if it costs slightly more, because you're investing in community resilience. You start thinking long-term about ownership, not just income. You ask, how can I own productive property, even small scale? Maybe it's tools for a trade. Maybe it's equipment for a side business. Maybe it's just fully owning your car outright instead of perpetual payments. Each step toward ownership is a step toward freedom. You reorient your life toward building equity, away from enriching landlords and corporations, toward creating something you own, away from pure wage dependence. This isn't going back to medieval times. It's applying timeless principles to 2024 reality. So, how do you actually move toward distributism in a world structured against it? Chesterton was honest. This isn't easy. The entire economic and political system is now designed to concentrate ownership and keep families dependent. But he believed, and I find this incredibly compelling, that even small moves toward ownership and independence matter enormously. Let me give you Chesterton's hierarchy of priorities, adapted to now. First, secure housing ownership, if at all possible. This is foundational. Owning your home means you can't be evicted, rent can't be raised. You're building equity instead of enriching a landlord. Is it harder now than for previous generations? Yes, and that's exactly what Chesterton would point to as evidence of how concentrated ownership has become. But even a small house you own beats a large apartment you rent. From a distributor's perspective, you need a foothold of owned property. Second, learn practical skills that have value independent of a specific employer. Can you fix things, build things, grow things, cook real food? Basic carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, gardening, cooking, sewing, car repair. These skills are forms of productive property. You own them. They can't be outsourced or automated easily. They give you economic options and resilience. Chesterton would say, every man should know how to do real, practical work with his hands, not just abstract knowledge work. Third, support and build local economic structures. Shop at the farmer's market, even if it costs more. Use the local hardware store instead of Home Depot. Eat at locally owned restaurants. Bank at a local credit union instead of a mega bank. Yes, this costs more sometimes, but you're not just buying products, you're investing in an alternative economic structure. You're voting with dollars for distributed ownership. Fourth, explore ownership of productive property, even small scale. Could you buy tools and learn a trade you could practice on the side? Could you start a small business, even if it's just side income at first? Could you own a rental property someday, becoming a small landlord yourself, keeping ownership distributed? Could you join or form a cooperative? These aren't get-rich-quick schemes. They're about gaining ownership of something productive. Fifth, embrace subsidiarity in how you make decisions. This means prioritize local and immediate over distant and abstract. Your city council matters more than Congress for your daily life. Get involved locally. Your neighborhood matters more than national politics. Know your neighbors. Organize locally. Your family's choices matter more than what experts say families should do. Exercise your authority and responsibility at the smallest level. Now, Chesterton would also say, and this is crucial, Individual action alone can't create a distributive economy. You also need policy change. What would distributive policy look like? Aggressive anti-monopoly enforcement. Break up corporations that dominate entire sectors. Prevent mergers that concentrate ownership. Tax structures that favor family ownership. Lower taxes on small businesses and family farms. Higher taxes on concentrated corporate ownership, especially absentee ownership of housing. Incentives for worker ownership. Make it easier legally and financially for workers to buy stakes in the companies they work for. Support cooperatives. Protection of local businesses. Regulatory structures that don't accidentally favor large corporations with compliance departments over small businesses. Land reform. Making it possible for families to actually buy land and homes, not just rent forever. Will you see these policies enacted soon? Probably not, because both major parties represent versions of concentrated ownership. Democrats want state control. Republicans want corporate control. Neither wants distributed family ownership. But here's what gives me hope. You're watching this video. You now know distributism exists. You can't unknow it. And when you start seeing the world through distributist eyes, everything looks different. That dead downtown? Not inevitable. Result of policy favoring chains over local. Your inability to afford a house? Not personal failure. Result of treating housing as investment commodity instead of family necessity. Your alienation from work? Not weakness. Result of industrial organization that separates you from meaningful production. Chesterton gave you the conceptual framework to understand your frustration and the philosophical foundation to resist. The question is, will you? Now you see economics in a completely different way. You were taught there were two options: capitalism or socialism, markets or state, corporations or government. That binary is how they keep you from imagining actual family independence. Because both options, whether ownership concentrates in private hands or government hands, leave your family propertyless and dependent. Chesterton revealed the third way they don't want you to know exists: distributism. Productive property distributed widely among families. Not perfect equality. That's a socialist fantasy. Not concentrated oligarchy. That's capitalist reality. But a society structured so that most families own something productive: a home, a business, land, tools, skills. This wasn't utopian fantasy. It was a normal way humans lived for most of history. It was systematically destroyed over 150 years by industrial capitalism, then by socialism building on capitalism's theft. Both claimed this concentration was inevitable, progressive, necessary. Chesterton said it was a choice, and we can choose differently. The core insight, and this is what changes everything, is that economics isn't a technical science of efficiency. It's a moral question. What structures allow families to flourish? When you start from that question, distributism becomes obvious. Of course families should own homes. Of course workers should have ownership stakes. Of course local communities should make local decisions. Of course massive concentration of ownership in either corporations or state is destructive to human dignity and freedom. You weren't crazy for feeling economically trapped. The game is rigged. Rigged toward concentration, dependence, control. Your frustration is rational response to an irrational system. But now you have the framework to understand it, the language to name it, and the principles to resist it. You know what distributism is. You know why Chesterton fought for it. You know how it applies to your life in 2024. The transformation isn't that you'll suddenly become a property owner overnight. It's that you now see the goal clearly. Ownership, independence, human-scale economics, family flourishing. And you can start moving that direction, even in small ways. Every choice toward ownership, toward local, toward skill, toward community is a choice for distributism and against the concentrated system that wants you dependent. This is what Chesterton gave you: intellectual liberation. You're not trapped in their binary anymore. You have a third way, the actually human way. From now on, when you make economic decisions, where to live, where to work, what to buy, how to spend money, you'll remember that Chesterton taught us to ask, does this move me toward ownership or dependence? Toward local or corporate? Toward family independence or system dependence? You don't need to be perfect. You can't opt out of the economy, but you can reorient your life directionally. This week, make one distributor's choice. Buy groceries from a farmer's market instead of a chain store. You're supporting local family ownership. Research buying a home, even if it seems impossible, because owning is a foundation and you need to know what's actually required, not what fear tells you. Learn one practical skill through YouTube or a local class. You're gaining productive property, knowledge. That's yours forever. Open an account at a local credit union instead of a mega bank. You're choosing distributed finance over concentrated finance. Visit your city council meeting. You're practicing subsidiarity, engaging at the local level where you actually have influence. In the coming months, observe how distributist principles clarify everything. Why is Amazon bad for your town? Not because online shopping is evil, but because it concentrates ownership away from your community. Why does your corporate job feel alienating? Not because work is bad, but because you own none of it. You're pure wage labor. Why can't young people afford family formation? Not because they're lazy, but because housing and essentials are priced assuming two incomes and no ownership. Chesterton gives you the lens to see clearly. And when you see clearly, you can act accordingly, not perfectly, not all at once, but directionally toward a recovery of family economic independence. The adventure is rebuilding one family at a time, one choice at a time, what was stolen. The widespread ownership that makes freedom real. There's a phrase from Chesterton I can't forget. Too much capitalism does not mean too many capitalists, but too few capitalists. Do you feel the weight of that truth? Do you recognize how it changes everything? He's saying the problem isn't that people own things. It's that too few people own things. Real capitalism would mean you're a capitalist. You own productive property. But they gave you a system where only the very few own and the rest rent, borrow, and depend. Distributism is a recovery of actual capitalism for actual families. Imagine your life 5 years after embracing these principles. You won't be perfect. You won't own a farm and be completely self-sufficient. That's not the point. But you'll own more than you do now. You'll have skills they can't take from you. You'll buy local when you can, knowing you're building community resilience. You'll make decisions at the most local level. Your family, your neighborhood, your town. You'll see your children learning practical skills, understanding ownership, thinking long-term about building something real. You won't be completely independent. None of us can be in a complex society, but you'll be more free than you are now. And that direction, that movement toward ownership and independence, is what matters. This channel exists to discover together the wisdom of thinkers like Chesterton, people who saw through the lies of their age and offered true alternatives. In the next video, we'll explore Chesterton's devastating critique of modern education and what real learning looks like. May you find the courage to own, to build, to create, to be truly free of their age and offer true alternatives. In the next video, we'll explore Chesterton's devastating critique of modern education and what real learning looks like. May you find the courage to own, to build, to create, to be truly free of their age and offer true alternatives. In the next video, we'll explore Chesterton's devastating critique of modern education and what real learning looks like. May you find the courage to own, to build, to create, to be truly free of their age and offer true alternatives. In the next video, we'll explore Chesterton's devastating critique of modern education and what real learning looks like. May you find the courage to own, to build, to create, to be truly free of their age and offer true alternatives. In the next video, we'll explore Chesterton's devastating critique of modern education and what real learning looks like. May you find the courage to own, to build, to create, to be truly free of their age and offer true alternatives. In the next video, we'll explore Chesterton's devastating critique of modern education and what real learning looks like. May you find the courage to own, to build, to create, to be truly free of their age and offer true alternatives. In the next video, we'll explore Chesterton's devastating critique of modern education and what real learning looks like. May you find the courage to own, to build, to create, to be truly free of their age and offer true alternatives. In the next video, we'll explore Chesterton's devastating critique of modern education and what real learning looks like. May you find the courage to own, to build, to create, to be truly free of their age and offer true alternatives. In the next video, we'll explore Chesterton and what real learning looks like. May you find the courage to own, to build, to create, to be truly free of their age and offer true alternatives.